Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and in today's video I want to make a very special but also kind of an odd video, something I usually don't do. With Shadowlands being here, we're going to have most likely a lot of new players checking out the game. Maybe you've never played World of Warcraft before and you're thinking of trying out Rogue for this next expansion. Maybe you're someone who used to play the game before and are coming back for pre-patch and you haven't really kept up with Rogue and want to find out what's new, and maybe if this class might even be for you. Is this really the perfect pick? Is this something you actually might be interested in? So this is why in this video we'll be going over some of the basics of Rogue, mostly from the perspective of a brand new player to introduce you to the spec, but also talk about some of the different things about it that have changed from previous expansions. Without further ado, let's just dive into the video to find out if Rogue might be a perfect fit for you going into pre-patch Shadowlands. So in this video, I want to kind of get into rogues in the way where I want to kind of go into the very basics first. And then I want to go over some of the things that have changed to rogues as well as the different specs from the last expansion going into Shadowlands. And then get you guys a little bit of a rundown on how you would end up playing your rogue, at least as a start going into Shadowlands. So first things first, Rogue is a class that's all about stealth. Stealth is a buff that allows you to, well, become almost invisible to the human eye. It lets you bypass powerful enemies as long as you are not walking literally in front of them and on top of them. Now, none of the NPCs in this area are hostile, but if you want to be better suited against hostile enemies, definitely don't just stand and dance in front of their face. You want to make sure to go around them, to go through the crevices, and be very careful with your positionals. For rogues, questing with stealth is very easy. In PvP, it allows rogues to always have the opener as long as you're careful about it. In dungeons, you can bypass certain enemies and apply crowd control, which is another thing rogues are good at. In raids, it doesn't really have that much use, but it always makes sure that you have the proper opener on a boss from any positional and any advantage. So with stealth comes a lot of stealth-based abilities, and rogues have quite a lot of them. Let's first talk about stealth abilities that you'll start with. As you level your rogue, you'll get quite a few abilities. First one being ambush. Most rogues will end up getting this one, depending on the spec that you play. Ambush is a basic ability that lets you open up on your target, ambush them, literally, generate some common points. It costs a little bit of energy, but the damage for it is definitely worth pressing. Another opener, which most of these abilities from stealth are called openers, which takes you out of stealth and into the combat, is going to be cheap shot, which will stun the enemy instead. Rogues are very heavy about crowd control, so being able to cheap shot the enemy with a stun will at least lock them down in place for a minute so they can't attack you or anybody else. In dungeons, it can be good if you're going to be opening up on an enemy that's mid-casting a spell, stunning them, preventing the cast from going through. Another ability that's really good for rogues as well is Sap. It's going to be a Incapacitate effect. Incapacitate effect is a crowd control that stops the enemy from being able to do anything as long as they don't take damage. So you don't want to sap an enemy you're going to be attacking. Better sap the enemies that are you don't want to attack and you want to crowd control them. So instead of pulling 4 really tough enemies, you can sap one and turn the number from 4 into 3. Now it might be a little bit easier for your group to manage the trash pack. Another fun ability rogues have that's in stealth only is Pickpocket. As you're out in the world and questing, you should definitely spam Pickpocket as often as you can. Picking anything that's in enemies' pockets, you might be able to find some treasures that you might even be able to lockpick, which rogues can do as well. The basic playstyle for rogues is going to be this. You're going to generate common points. And once you have enough common points, usually at 4 or 5, in most cases at 5, then you'll use finishers on those common points. These finishers can be a buff to increase your auto attack speed. These finishers can be a bleed. The more common points you invest, the stronger the bleed is going to be. Or these abilities can be abilities that are there to maybe stun the enemy with abilities like Kidney Shot in order to spend common points to lock the enemy down. Or abilities like Eviscerate and Envenom that are there just to do damage to the enemy. Depending on the spec and playstyle, the usage of common points is going to differ. Some specs are going to be all about putting debuffs on enemies, others are going to be mostly about buffing themselves, but all rogues use common points and energy in various ways. The way I would look at it is this. Energy allows you to build common points and use majority of your abilities. Common points allow you to use a more powerful version of some of the rogue's abilities. Usually try to build common points all the way to 4 or 5 depending on the spec, and then spend them all at once. So it's going to be a lot of builder and spender with a constant of energy, which can be generated through different ways. We'll talk about how each rogue generates energy when we hop into specs. Let's do a quick rundown of some of the basic abilities rogues have, and then we'll talk about some of the spec-specific abilities as well, and we'll talk about the playstyles for rogues. Some of the abilities rogues are going to share are Blind, which is a very powerful 2-minute CC. Think of it as a sap, but can be used outside of stealth. Again, if you hit an enemy that's blinded, it's also going to break the CC, but it's very powerful and it's on a 2-minute cooldown. Cloak of Shadows is our very powerful defensive. 2-minute cooldown, cover yourself with a cloak, immune to all spells for the duration of that ability. This ability is a must-have for rogues, but you should be using it sparingly. Don't be pressing it on cooldown all the time. Use it when you have the most amount of damage or about to take a very powerful hit from an enemy that is going to be of magical variety. Cloak of Shadows should be used very sparingly, but using it during crucial times can really save you a game. Crimson Vial is a basic way the rogues are going to heal, using some energy on a 30-second cooldown to pop a healing potion. Going from BFA to Shadowlands, this heal is a little weaker. It's gone from 30% to 20% of your health, and it's gone from 6 seconds worth of heal to 4 seconds worth of heal. So it's slightly weaker, but at least it heals you a little faster. Distract is an ability that can be used to distract an enemy. Let's say you have a target that passes around in front of a camp and you want it to stop at a certain point of camp to path. You will distract it. Make the enemy face in another direction, able to easier sneak by them. Has some uses in dungeons as well. Evasion is a physical version of Cloak of Shadows, except Evasion lets you dodge abilities. Now dodge works from the front, so you want to make sure you're facing the enemy that you're trying to dodge. It doesn't work if the enemy is attacking you from the back, so make sure to face them. And this won't work if you're CC'd, so Evasion will not protect you if you're under crowd control. Evasion is a very powerful tool, but be sure to be in front of the enemy. Going from BFA into Shadowlands, Outlaw also gets Evasion instead of Parry, which is a much stronger version in my opinion, so that's a pretty big buff. Rogues are very survivable. We saw Evasion, we saw Cloak. Feint is another ability that makes you take less area of effect damage. So in hindsight, if let's say a boss drops down a massive meteor on your group, everybody is going to scatter in every direction not to get hit by a meteor. The rogue can actually press Feint and take a brunt of that damage and reduce it by a whole 40%, with a good chance that you might end up staying alive. That's more uptime for you to just continue DPSing the boss, stabbing him in the toe, while you just take this hit head on. Kick is a basic interrupt for rogues. Quite a lot of classes have an interrupt. Rogues have a kick. It's just a basic melee interrupt. Will be useful if you're trying to interrupt an enemy's spellcast. Kidney Shot we talked about really earlier. It's a way for you to stun the enemy utilizing combo points. So it's a very powerful version of a stun. It's different than Cheap Shot, where Cheap Shot can be used from stealth. Kidney Shot can be used out of stealth. Pick Lock, we talked about it a little bit earlier. It just allows you to pick certain doors and chests, and you might encounter some of those while you're leveling. So be on the lookout for places where you can pick lock. Maybe your guildies or friends might even have a lockbox that a powerful enemy has dropped, so be sure to pick it for them, but maybe ask for some gold in return. Poisons are also returning for rogues. Each spec is going to have slightly different poisons. Assassination is going to have deadly poison, whereas Outlaw and Subtlety are going to have instant poison. The difference between those two poisons is deadly poison and instant poison have a chance to apply a poison to an enemy. So when you stab the enemy, application, it'll do instant nature damage. For Outlaw and Subtlety, that's where it ends. For Assassination, you also have a damage over time component of deadly poison, making it even deadlier, since Assassination is mostly about, well, being the master of poisons. This is called a lethal poison. The second lethal poison is wound poison, which is mostly used in PvP to reduce enemies' healing. So if you're trying to kill an enemy and the healer is healing them, wound poison will be your best friend. Then we have non-lethal poisons. These poisons don't do any damage, but they do apply different debuffs. Like crippling poison will cripple your enemy, slowing them down. We'll also get numbing poison at a later time in the expansion that will even slow down enemies' attack speed and casting speed, and you can see how that can be useful for rogues in dungeons. Shiv is another interesting ability that will have some uses for Assassination in the future. Generally for rogues it's not insane right now, but it will get better as we unlock numbing poison in Shadowlands. With Shiv you apply a more concentrated version of your non-lethal poison. So a crippling poison would be 70% slow instead of 50. Numbing poison will actually have a de-enrage effect to it. So let's say if a beast attacks your tank in a dungeon and it goes berserk, you can de-enrage certain enemies, which will be a very interesting mechanic going forward. Sprint is an ability that allows you to just zoom around the map. On a minute cooldown, you can just pop it and run away from a threat or close the gap if you so wish. Trickster Trade is an interesting ability. What this will do upon applying to an ally, which usually will be a tank, when you apply it, out of stealth and during your opener, all threat that you would normally generate with damage instead will go to your tank. So try to use this as much as you can on your tank before any kind of group content play. Vanish is a powerful offensive but also defensive. It lets you stealth immediately. Certain rogue abilities actually amplified while inside of stealth, so if you want to say Vanish to get a powerful ambush into an enemy to do some burst damage, you totally could do that. But also you can use Vanish in PvP to vanish and run away from a fight if you feel like it's a losing battle. For Rogue, staying alive and playing unfairly against enemies is generally the play, so utilize Vanish any way you want to. You also have Fleet Footed, which is a passive that increases your movement speed and makes you take less falling damage. So as a rogue, when you're questing and you feel like you want to jump down a cliff to find some treasures, you're one of the specs that actually might survive the fall, which is really cool. Now that we talked about the basic abilities for rogues, I want to give you a bit of a rundown on how to play some of the specs for beginners. If you're someone who's a veteran to this, you can skip most of this video, but I want to give a bit of advice for any player that is new to World of Warcraft in terms of playing their spec and how you should maybe open up on the enemy, what buffs you should maintain in order to take down your foe. So we'll start off with Assassination. There's a couple cool things about Assassination that you must remember. At some point while you're leveling through your Assassination Rogue, you'll unlock a passive called Venomous Wounds. Venomous Wounds is how you regenerate energy. You regain 7 energy each time your Garrote or Rupture deal bleed damage. Your Garrote is a basic bleed that costs quite a bit of energy, and you want to maintain it on an enemy at all times. You have Rupture, which is a bleed that takes combo points, so you'll want to maintain some get some combo points first, then put a Rupture on the enemy. And you also have Slice and Dice, which you will want to maintain at all times, and when you don't have any combo points to spend on Rupture, Slice and Dice, and your Garrote is on the enemy, feel free to press Envenom, which will be the main dump of damage into the enemy after all the other requisites have been met. In the opener Assassination, you'll probably want to open up with maybe either Ambush or Cheap Shot, but you can also open up with Garrote, as Garrote actually has a stealth benefit. Like against casters, it will also silence the target, and there's certain talents that can even make Garrote even stronger. But as a basic rogue, I think you should open up on the enemy with an Ambush. You should set up a Garrote as soon as you can, and you should set up Rupture on the enemy as soon as possible. And then try to get your Slice and Dice on the enemy as fast as you humanly can. The faster you can get up a Slice and Dice, the better. Once you have Slice and Dice and all abilities are up, press Envenom on the enemy and just continue hitting them until they're dead. If you are for any reason are in AoE situation and you need to hit multiple enemies as Assassination Rogue, you should switch from Mutilate to your Phantom Knives. Phantom Knives will do an AoE damage to a bunch of enemies, doing physical damage but also applying all your poisons, so it'll be a lot easier for you to get your poisons on everybody. And for AoE, try to also maintain Garrote on as many enemies as possible, as well as Rupture on as many enemies as possible. Also try to maintain Slice and Dice as best you can unless you're fighting way too many enemies, where putting out bleeds and poisons is going to be top priority. And if you don't need to put up poisons and bleeds on anybody, I guess you're free to spam Envenom as well. There are also some talents that can change your playstyle slightly, so that's definitely something for you to explore at a later time. And it's going to be the very basic playstyle of your Assassination Rogue as you're picking up. It's going to be very easy, very simple. It's mostly about maintaining damage over time components and buffs as well as debuffs on the enemy, and doing as much damage as you humanly can. There's a variety of different talents that can enhance the playstyle of your Assassination, and you should definitely play with these abilities as you're questing. But some of you guys that are coming back to the game, Blindside has been changed a little. It now works off of your ambushes, so you might want to put ambush on your non-stealth bar as well. Ambush does quite a bit of damage and it's really fun to play with. And then Alacrity is gone because Toxic Blade effect is going to be available at a later time, so Alacrity replaces it for now. But for the most part, Assassination is fairly box standard as not too much has changed. But this is going to be the very basics and some of the changes that Assassination has seen. The next spec on this list is going to be Outlaw. And Outlaw is read in the game as a ruthless fugitive who uses agility and guile to stand toe to toe with enemies. It's kind of like the pirate spec of the game. So Outlaws actually can use heavier weapons. So in this box right here, I should have some swords. An Assassination uses daggers. Subtlety mostly wants to use daggers, but Outlaw can use heavy weapons like swords, maces, fists, as well as axes. But if you want to use a dagger in your offhand, you won't really feel that much bad. In fact, having a dagger in offhand can be good since poisons are back, and with more dagger swings from poisons, more chances for those poisons to be applied to the enemy. But you can play it almost any way you want to. So the way you play Outlaw, it's less of a stealth-based gameplay. It's not really as important for you to find a proper opener. So I guess in most cases you'll want to open up with an ambush on the enemy. I'll try to kind of face away from enemies so you don't see the auto attacks all the time. As Outlaw, however, before stealth, before you really get into combat, the one ability you can play with is going to be Roll the Bones. Roll the Bones can be used before you open up on the enemy. It'll give you a random buff and it will look like, well, bones. It will look like dice, like a parity dice. That'll give you a variety of different buffs, from crit increases to maybe more energy regen, extra common points it generates. So with this ability, try to maintain it a buff of Roll the Bones at all times. If it falls off, re-roll it. Otherwise, you don't really need to re-roll Roll the Bones, especially if you're just starting out. Just make sure that a buff from Roll the Bones is up all the time. So before you start attacking the enemy, you want to make sure to Roll the Bones at the very beginning. Try to get your buff as early as you can. So we'll wait for Roll the Bones to be off CD, so we can kind of show you how you would end up playing the spec. Also, as Outlaw, you will want to maintain poisons up as well. I know Assassination is the poison spec, but still, poisons increase your output now with this change in Shadowlands, so make sure those are up all the time. Okay, so we'll Roll the Bones before we attack an enemy. Whatever buff we get is whatever buff we get. Don't worry too much about it when you're questing. And we'll open up on the enemy usually with an ambush to try to ambush the enemy. Then we'll build common points and we'll try to apply Slice and Dice to us as soon as possible. Slice and Dice will give us quite a lot of auto attacks and a lot of energy regeneration for Outlaw. This is going to be really good. Then you want to press Sinister Strike for your basic common point builder. If Slice and Dice is up, proceed to hitting the enemy with Between the Eyes. Between the Eyes will put up a debuff where the enemy will be more likely to be crit by you. You want to maintain that as basic as best you can. Roll the Bones fell off, so we're going to re-roll the bones. We're going to keep hitting Sinister Strike as Slice is about to fall off to refresh it. Pistol Shot is an ability that lights up sometimes when you have an extra hit from Sinister Strike. To use it whenever it lights up, it's generally not a good idea to use Pistol Shot unless it lights up. Slice and Dice up, and press Between the Eyes, then you press Dispatch as your basic common point spender. And that's going to be the basic playstyle of Outlaw. Now, you'll get a variety of different buffs from Roll the Bones. Some will have damage cooldown reduction, some will give you extra energy, some will let you generate more common points, some will give you more uptime on Slice and Dice. So you will notice some of the different things that these buffs do. So as you're questing on your rogue, do try to adjust to the different buffs that you get from Roll the Bones. It really is a box of chocolates. You never really know what you're going to get in the next roll. So just keep rolling and keep trying to maintain Slice and Dice. Keep shooting your pistols all the time and take it as easy as you want to. Outlaw is actually quite a lot of fun and does a lot of AoE. Speaking about AoE, the easiest spec for AoE. With Outlaw, to start doing AoE, do the same thing you do for your single target rotation. Just press Blade Flurry, and then you'll be able to cleave enemies all around you. It'll just simply transform all your single target abilities to also cleave. So find the biggest guy in the group and start cleaving off of them. Or pick them apart one at a time if you want to. Either way works. But it's a very effective spec for AoE, and I think you'll find it quite good, especially if you go to dungeons or big target pulls. As long as you can have, some survivability with Evasion and Cloak of Shadows, of course. But the spec is gotten a little bit harder to play from some of the changes in Shadowlands. It's a lot faster now, especially if you played this spec before. It's less about just rolling the bones, which you used to do at some point. Now it's about maintaining a lot of buffs and debuffs. Some of the bigger changes for Outlaw are going to be in the talents. If you are not new to the spec, we have a few changes like Retractable Hook retracts faster now. You gain Dread Blades instead of Slice and Dice, and Slice is baseline. Dread Blades is returning from Legion, which is really cool. And Killing Spree as a talent might actually be really strong for single target if you missed that one or mispressing one before. But for the most part, Outlaw is slightly changed, but nothing too crazy. And finally, we have Subtlety. This spec is going to have the most benefit from stealth. As Subtlety, as described by Blizzard, a dark stalker who leaps from the shadows to ambush his unsuspecting prey. Subtleties dwell in the shadows, and they enhance their stealth in a variety of ways. Stealth is their biggest tool. Where other specs might roll buffs or bleeds, Subtleties buff themselves through stealth. They even have a special ability that allows them access to stealth-based abilities quite regularly called Shadow Dance. Allows use of all stealth abilities. Grants all combat benefits of stealth, which can be modified through talents, so you can really express your damage and really exacerbate the damage you do while in stealth. And Flatline increases your damage by 15%. So this ability is quite crazy. It gives you a foot into stealth while you're mid-combat. Normally rogues have to vanish to get back into stealth. You just get to dip in stealth while you're in combat. And your stealth abilities are very, very powerful. There's a lot of talents that increase the effectiveness of your stealth, which further increases the effectiveness of your Shadow Dance. That's something for you to explore as you level your rogue. But the basics of your sub-rogues are going to be this. You'll backstab the enemy and you want to make sure you're back behind the enemy. Backstab will actually do 20% more damage if you're behind the enemy, so you want to make sure to do that. Backstab also has a chance to apply an ability called Find Weakness, which, once we get it, we'll show you. As the other specs, maintain Slice and Dice at all times, and I would recommend doing double daggers for the spec. As you're backstabbing the enemy, hoping for a buff, but you didn't get it, you want to maintain Rupture on at least 3 enemies. If there's more than 3, you kind of want to drop the Rupture. And if we can get our buff for this spec, we can get Find Weakness, which lets you bypass enemies' armor. Abilities from stealth for sub-rogues, like Cheap Shot and Shadow Strike, will reveal a flaw in enemies' defense, and you will try to exploit it as a sub-rogue. Sometimes you backstab, and certain abilities as you level through the spec in the future expansion of Shadowlands can also reveal a flaw for a short moment. This only happens when backstab crits, so you'll stack quite a lot of crit for your spec when you're going to be playing it in the next expansion. When the enemies have a weakness revealed, certain abilities become stronger. Normally the other specs will try to use your Dispatch or Envenom in order to dump combo points, but for Subtlety, you actually have a mastery that's all about finishers. Your mastery is going to enhance the damage of your finishing abilities. Rupture is a good finisher, but one that's better is going to be Eviscerate. It'll do a lot of damage, big burst damage to an enemy for the combo points that you spend, and if the target has Find Weakness debuff on them, extra damage will be done from Eviscerate, 50% of it as pure shadow damage. Shadow damage is cool because it goes through all armor, so you have 50% damage as just going through enemy like hot knife through butter, while the rest of your abilities will be kind of modified by armor changes. But Find Weakness at least lets you bypass a portion of the armor, so at least it makes it a little bit easier for you to do damage. So that's going to be the basic playstyle of maintaining your Rupture on the enemy, if you have 1 or 3, and you'll try to get as many Find Weakness procs as possible by backstabbing the enemy. But where the fun becomes for the spec is when you go into Shadow Dance. When you press Shadow Dance, you get the access to your stealth bar, so you want to make sure your stealth bar is basically the same as your normal auto stealth bar, which is exactly what I did. You'll get access to a different ability better than Ambush. It is called Shadow Strike. Shadow Strike costs quite a bit of energy, does a ton of damage, while Stealth, it will teleport you behind the enemy, so as sub-rogue you can kind of really ambush the enemy from a distance and just surprise them out of nowhere, but also it will do damage, extra damage, and the combo points it generates is huge. So during your Shadow Dance or during Stealth, you'll want to spam Shadow Strikes, maintain Rupture, maintain Slice and Dice as best as you can, and most importantly sink as many Eviscerates into the enemy as possible. Now, the way to do that for Subtlety is to have a lot of buffs that increase your damage. Your Shadow Dance increases your damage by 15%. Another ability called Symbols of Death will increase your damage by 15% on top of that, so it'll be 30% damage increase from 2 different effects. Symbols of Death also gives you energy. Sub-rogues have a kind of a low-ish energy regen. You get it quite well from auto attacks, but this will be where most of your energy will come from. You'll be able to get extra energy from Symbols of Death, which can be used in a very specific rotation setup to deal mad damage to an enemy, being very much about big burst. So let's say in the opener you might want to open up an enemy with a Shadow Strike, get yourself slicing this up and running immediately. You'll go into Shadow Dance, Symbols of Death, and try to get as many Shadow Strikes into Eviscerates, doing an insane amounts of damage. Trying to use it as much as you can on 4 or 5 common points if possible, while Find Weakness is up. This allows the spec to have very bursty playstyle, but also outside of bursty playstyle, the bleed and the auto attacks as well as the poison applications from your instant poison, you'll want to maintain those as well at all times. It will allow you a little bit of sustain, but the spec is still going to be mostly about big bursts, so when you have Shadow Dance and Symbols of Death together back up, you want to make sure to use them together in order to deal the most amount of damage to the enemy, sinking as many Eviscerates during the short window that you can. That's going to be a playstyle for the spec. Big burst sustain, and kind of maintenance. Big burst, sustain, and maintenance, as you dip your foot into the shadow and really ambush the enemy all over and over and over again. Which gives the spec actually quite a bit of an edge, because in stealth you can use abilities like cheap shot, and in PvP, using shadow dance and cheap shotting multiple enemies can be insanely strong. But that's going to be the very basics of your sub-rogue. For AoE, you don't really have too much rotation, at least at the beginning. You'll get a lot more interesting stuff come Shadowlands, but you'll have an ability of Shirk and Storm. This ability will generate 1 combo point per target hit. So if you hit a bunch of enemies, you can generate a lot of combo points. If let's say you're in a trash pack of 5 enemies and you press this ability, one single press of this ability can give you 5 combo points. So you can get 5 combo points and then eviscerate the biggest guy in that group. 5 combo points, eviscerate the biggest guy in your group. Or you can spread Rupture to a bunch of enemies, who knows. There's a variety of different ways for sub-rogues to play, and it's a very interesting playstyle of this ninja-esque style that Blizzard tried to do for this spec. The spec definitely saw a lot of improvement going from BFA into Shadowlands by making certain things baseline, like Find Weakness no longer being a talent. So for any of you guys that are coming back, Find Weakness not being a talent is huge. Instead you get Premeditation, which can give you easier uptime with your Slice and Dice. For the most part, the spec didn't really change, but Secret Technique is going to be almost a must-have in any Mythic Plus content. Most of the other stuff is available for the spec, and you can really go ham with different playstyles now that you have Find Weakness baseline. It really starts to solidify the spec, and if you're coming back to the game, Sub-Rogue is definitely a spec you should check out if you've played the spec at any point in previous expansions. Now, there's a lot for me to cover when it comes to the class of Rogue, and there's certain things that I didn't cover that are more advanced. I just want to give you guys a little bit of a taste of what Rogue feels like and plays like if you're a brand new player, or maybe if you're just returning back to the game and are thinking of maybe giving a Rogue a try as a potential alt, or maybe even a potential main. Just wanted to give you guys a very base idea of how the class plays and how the various specs play and have changed over this last few expansions. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think about Rogue? Is that a class that you think might be worth for you to play? Is it something that maybe fits your playstyle? Is it something you were thinking of giving a go to? Thank you all so much for watching again. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see all of you in the next one.